spending now the last section of this morning with me. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the first 3 sessions because I just arrived. My name is Helmut Scholze. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, and living now since 8 years in Dubai. And I'm heading the infrastructure and transportation practice of Roland Berger. Roland Berger is one of the top 10 management consulting firms. We're actually the only European firm in this list. All the others are American, and we're trying to bring a bit of, let's say, German practice to the industry. My very first project that actually brought me to the Middle East was linked to real estate. It was looking into one of Dubai Holdings entities, and that was before the financial crisis. And it was a very interesting experience. And those were the heydays of real estate development in Dubai, where you had seen sales price growth of 50 to 70% year-on-year. And the interesting fact about that, and that actually leads directly to you, what you said, the main discussion that happened there was primarily about the design. I still remember the management talking at least 3 hours about the design of the tower, how it could look like, the logo and everything, and until somebody asked the question, hey, does it financially make sense? So that's where typically the management consultants come in, and where I would like to lead you today also a little bit through, let's say, the less sexy part of the business, the one where we look at primarily the cost side of things, and how you can actually improve the capital productivity of real estate developments. What do we mean by capital productivity? Well, value creation for companies is quite easy if you break it down. It's more or less return on your invested capital. So you want to generate good returns, and you want ideally to invest as least capital as possible. So how can you get the most out of the capital you invest in your developments? That's where I would like to spend now a little bit of time and lead you through some of the experience that we have made in the region, working for a broad variety of clients. The spectrum ranged so far, both on our firm as well as on my personal side, from working with development houses, working with contractors, working with architects and engineering firms, working with Ministry of Housings. So I think we bring together a quite good spectrum of experiences from all different angles. Of course, it's a bit different or difficult to address in the presentation. Also, the audience here is quite mixed. But I hope there's something in it for you which is interesting for everyone. I wanted to quickly basically go through 3 parts of that. 1, setting the stage, what are currently key challenges and what will be also key challenges now for the next 2 to 3 years. Then looking into, let's say, a broader overview on capital productivity levers, and then last but not least going into some details that are more specifically focusing on project execution and where typical pitfalls are that can be avoided in order to make sure you don't lose on the cost side. Key challenges, so that's unfortunately currently a little bit also starting with the market outlook. And most of my presentations right now start unfortunately with slides like this. Here in the region, specifically of course in the GCC region, but the outlay is also coming to the broader region. A lot of the developments are ultimately, to a certain extent, publicly funded, be direct or indirect. That is heavily influenced right now, of course, by the declining oil price. And that means there will be less spending. So that's the bad news. The good news is, of course, it means you can do something about it, but that needs to be very efficiently done, and you need to actually, in these times, look much more at the cost side. Yeah? So, if you want to be competitive in this environment, this will be a lot about cost. Yeah? There will be, of course, always high-end luxury developments, but ultimately you need to know how to keep a grip on that if you want to succeed in this market conditions. And that's not going to change for the next 2 to 3 years if you look into all kind of, let's say, analyst reports, etc. Now the good news, as I said, there is a good news, and I'm not going to go through all of this in detail. The good news is that the construction industry, particularly, and that ultimately leads, of course, into also the developers' pockets, etc., is an industry which hasn't seen too much productivity improvements over the last years. I'm talking really about the 20-year horizon. If you just look at other industries, chemicals, basic metals, motor vehicles, more or less all industries have seen, this is just a look now from 1990 to 2010, productivity improvements of up to 50% or more. Construction has been largely flat. The last 5 years, actually, you've seen some developments. There is innovation happening, but quite frankly, when I'm sitting with my clients right now, I have a massive mandate with one of the largest contractors in the GCC region. That is really still very, very basic business. Yeah. So there is a lot of improvement potential. That's at least the experience, what I partially can see. Where does this come from? This comes from completely, let's say, unsatisfactory planning, unrealistic planning, etc. Where this comes from low degrees of standardization across projects. Of course, it's also inherent partially in the industry. The construction and real estate development industry is still much more local, much more fragmented than a lot of the other industries that I mentioned. And that also comes from very often, let's say, very basic problems on site where there's a lot of waste. So that's something that can be addressed. And in order to do that, you need to look at that from a comprehensive perspective. Without going again on all the details, primarily if you think about how to make the most out of your money and how to make the most out of your real estate developments, it is about 4 key questions. The first one is, how do I actually allocate my capital? The second question is, what are the right projects? Is my portfolio mix the right one? Last, then you need to look into the actual project execution. And underlying all of that, every contractor, also partially developer, needs to have the right organization, the right structure, processes, etc. in place. That sounds, of course, most probably not very surprising. That's very generic to a certain extent, but there has a lot of detail behind that. If you go into every of these individual levers, and if you want to do this properly, there's quite some knowledge there, and you can see huge differences in the approach that some developers and construction firms are taking. Just to share brief insights with you, without boring you again with most of the details, the first thing is, and I've seen, quite frankly, I haven't seen this, without the exception of 2 to 3 clients in the industry here, that you have a proper planning process in place. It doesn't start with having a budget at the end of the year ready. Maybe you start this already partially in August or September, and it is very clearly interlinked with your capital allocation process. Yeah? A lot of firms, it's really interesting. My current client actually, they still don't have a budget for 2016. Yeah, so that's of course a little bit the exception, I'd say, but in general, that is something where you need to look at that from a holistic perspective, where you need to look into how can you have a proper planning corporate calendar in place that is ultimately working to a machine, like a machine that is planning execution, which is often missing. And if you don't do this properly, then these allocation decisions are getting done on a very ad hoc basis. It's not properly structured, it's not reflected in the budget, etc. And then ultimately leads to the effect that you allocate your money to the wrong projects. If you want to look, of course, into your portfolio, that's also not rocket science. Doing the portfolio analysis is let's say, most of you most probably do this regularly, but still, again, a reminder, this is normally necessary to do this in a structured way. And I still, or often have seen companies that are looking at some projects without by far taking into account the risks that they're facing. So a properly balanced project portfolio is key in every business, but it's specifically key in a very volatile and cyclic business like the real estate and construction industry. And if you want to manage your projects, you need to make sure that you have a proper baseload. However many projects you do. Then, example, one of my last clients, typically it's a construction company, typically had around 100 projects per year. But there were significant cycles in it. And when we looked through this, and they came to us, 15 projects out of these 100 wiped out the total profit. 15 projects, that's it. Completely wiped out. So you can do nice analysis of the profitability of all projects, rank them, and you see, wow, amazing. And that's risk analysis and proper project prioritization up front to actually know what you're doing and focus on the right projects. The next point then is about the project execution. That's primarily looking at what can be done along the full project life cycle in order to improve your business case, to make sure your designs are actually as, let's say, cost effective as possible. So I'm always, let's say, you should see where you have gold-plated elements in your design. You can always de-specify and try to make this clear. That goes into having the right contracting strategy in place. That is an area where I just can't believe how many actually owners and project developers, primarily owners, specifically on the public side, leave literally billions on the table, but just don't knowing how to have the right contracting strategy in place, and even also not having the right personnel in place. One of my clients is a very large transportation infrastructure provider, and they do this process with a, let's say, classic procurement mindset, where they don't have people in there that actually act like commercial, a group that actually optimizes that. And when we talk about projects with a volume of $10 billion, bringing in maybe a team that might cost you $2 million is a very good investment if they know how to handle that. But that's always the same thing. It's a saving at the wrong areas. Procurement as well. There's a lot of money on the table in procurement, and that's an area where you can make or break actually partially your projects. Then, of course, the construction. Also here, I've seen the wildest things happening, and the actual execution of construction. If you go on the sites and see how this is managed, there's big differences between companies that have actually really well-planned execution on site, that have a strict management of the resources, and others where you see sometimes people playing chess for 2 hours and all that heavily affects your productivity and ultimately your cost levels. And of course, last but not least, the commissioning and ramp-up phase, which is often also quite a hassle. And how can you accelerate that? That is also key here to ensure that you proactively avoid the typical commissioning nonsense, the typical certification nightmare, but that you actually have a lean setup there with people that work together with the clients from construction perspective, and make sure there's no last-minute shots and the invoices are not getting paid, at least from a construction perspective. So, last but not least, then we have basically, last but not least, if you think back about the four, let's say, core areas, the four core dimensions, how to improve your capital productivity, the whole underlying organizational setup is quite important. And that starts, I don't know how far you talked about this as part of the presentation of people, but that starts, of course, about aligning all your people and having a proper performance management in place that is organizational as well as people-oriented, and that actually brings the importance of that into the, brings the importance of that into the mindset of the people. So you can always steer in how far your company is skewed towards achieving targets in this area by your performance management. That is just one area. It also starts about the organization. As I said, where you put your emphasis on, you might spend maybe some more money in order to have actually the right talent in place. That starts with the processes you have in place, to ensure that you don't leave unnecessary money on the table. And ultimately, that's also a key point which I often haven't seen that much, is systems. I mean, if you want to have transparency about your business, and you want to really understand how you perform, the easiest thing to do, often it's not that easy, it's true, but the key lever is systems. Having the right IT in place, it's incredible how this can simplify your life. You need to get that right, you need to have the right people to do this. It doesn't help if you have here, let's say, some programmers. You need really people that have an understanding of an operational perspective and IT, and bring this together. But having this in place, together with the right set of KPIs, allows you to have a super sharp transparency about your business performance, and that helps you to steer your business. If you have a pilot that has both eyes shut, it's going to be a little bit difficult to know if he's actually going to make the mountain or not. So this is one point where you can actually achieve a lot of transparency. The transparency comes before any performance review. That's a brief overview. I just want to now go into some examples, also to show you a little bit real life from some of the projects we've done, some experiences, to give you a bit of food for thought before I close then my presentation. That is sort of a little bit more detailed setup if you want to think about everything that can be done in order to achieve best-in-class project execution. It's primarily eight things you can do. Of course, you can do others as well, but if we focus on this now, the first thing when you talk about conceptualization is really that you challenge the business cases that you have, and you make sure you have viable business cases, and that is including risk adjustment. So that is something that is key, and which is, of course, there's always a balance between, let's say, time and going forward and achieving, let's say, developments quickly. You need to move ahead in this industry sometimes quite quickly, but still, sometimes that is something where you need to upfront already see how you can optimize that business case, and where are areas where you might actually be able to already right from the beginning save cost or improve on the other side also, of course, your revenues. Second topic, when we move into design and engineering, is optimized design. Now, the typical things here is standardization, modularization of the design, e-specification, challenging what specifications are that you have for your projects, and then also, of course, standardizing the design and the norms that you use. The next topic then, when we come to contracting and procurement, is, as I mentioned already, a smart contracting strategy, and you need to think about what is the right way to contract this to the market. Is it a lump sum way? Are there incentives that you can build in? Is it rather better to have separate designers and then go for somebody that can do cost-plus models and all the broad varieties that you have on the market? But that needs to be well thought through, especially again also with the risk allocation that is involved in this topic. Then, cost-efficient procurement. As I mentioned, the whole first point is have you actually considered the total cost of ownership? Very often the procurement looks sometimes at, let's say, components that are short lifespan cheaper, but the total cost of ownership gets, of course, much more driven up. It might not be a problem if you opt for a quick sale, although that will then ultimately reflect negatively in your brand. But for sure, it's not a great thing if you're an operator and keep the real estate assets under your roof for the next 20 years. Also, of course, then actually sourcing. If Do you have a proper database in place of all the categories you do? Do you use the right sets? Where you can do it, you have the right mix between low-cost country sourcing and others maybe where you need to go for, say, more qualitatively higher products. Subcontractor management as well, a very important point. Last but not least, then lean execution and accelerated management, commissioning and ramp-up. As I said, this is something that is very often down-to-earth work on the construction sites, making sure that the contractor that you're using is actually not wasting his and your time. And underlying to all of that, an integrated project management that is ideally closely interlinked, both from a developer perspective and a contractor perspective. I haven't seen a lot of contractors that are actually able to link to systems that developers use directly, unless they're in-house contractors. I haven't seen that. It exists in Europe, or a comprehensive risk management. So these are the levers that we mentioned before already in a bit more detailed. Just let me show you a few examples on real-life examples of this. For example, staircases. We had a client where we analyzed the categories to a certain detail, and interesting part was basically by using staircases from all different widths and lengths initially, just by actually standardizing that into bringing it to a selected variety of shapes. You achieve a significant overall saving in the cost for staircases. A very down-to-earth example that is when you look into the design, how can you actually optimize your design in a standardized modularized way. Despecifying, also here, for example, where we looked into lighting systems. Again, it always goes, of course, to a certain extent with your perception and your brand and the feeling you want to create in your buildings, but it depends on the areas. In this example, for example, the initial lighting element was 65% more expensive than what was ultimately chosen. And then take this over 10,000 lights, that gets to the money. And that's just one cost category we're talking about. Sourcing from low-cost country, mentioned that, of course, again, this is basically knowing how to categorize your products and which markets to look at. Again, here it's very important to have an experienced team on the ground. Sometimes supply development is required to break market concentrations. That was an example actually from the bitumen industry, where the client that we served was operating in an area where there was more or less a monopoly, which led to the fact that you had to more or less pay big prices that for the bitumen that the suppliers asked for. Finding ways either by breaking that up through external supply or sometimes by breaking out parts of that, can definitely work. Often also in very large-scale infrastructure projects, they tend to sometimes build their own supply in cement or whatever elements it is, because it depends, of course, on the sizes. For small-scale developments, which are not very relevant, but that can sometimes be also a quite interesting case. So looking for investors for certain key categories where you might do direct sourcing is definitely an option. The planning, we talked about planning. You need to be granular, you need to have a proper logic and sequence in place. You need to have the right buffers. Again, here, this is also a lot about understanding the interdependencies. And in this case example, by basically challenging the time needed for individual areas, but as well even building a buffer, just in terms of partial sequencing for some of the elements that need to be built. There was a time saving of 25% achieved for for the construction of skyscraper floors. So that brought down basically the amount of days per floor from 12 to 9 days. That's really a basic thing, ultimately. Last but not least, what I said, also the daily operations on construction sites. I mean, that's what I've seen primarily, I must admit, in the GCC area, are partially really wild experiences. Yeah? So, not only from a safety perspective, but in general from an organizational perspective, of course, it's linked also to the fact that a lot of the workers are expats that are often coming in without a lot of real construction experience. Yeah. So it starts, of course, already at that angle to ensure to have a proper base knowledge of the workforce that has some construction experience. So trade testing on site, whatever contractors hire people from other areas is important. But then it also really goes down to having a proper project manager in place and proper supervisors that can do their job. And that's, of course, very often, specifically in very large-scale mega projects, one of the core success factors as well, the project manager. That is also not to be underestimated. How much is actually a difference between somebody that knows how to manage a project and others that don't. Again, here, very easy things. By just mapping processes on the site, you can basically drive down the time needed for some areas by, again, more than 20%. Ultimately, these are all cost-saving potentials, and you can reduce the workforce, the contractor can reduce his workforce by 20% if that is properly implemented. Good. It's still not working, it doesn't want to. No. I wanted to leave you at least with a picture, my name, my contact details on it. Let's see if I manage to do this from here again. The gentlemen are coming and helping me. Totally lost in technical instances. Normally I'm actually quite, I thought I'm good, but I'm definitely not here. So don't hire me for the IT system implementation. Let me just jump to the last page. Let me do it. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I hope this was interesting from a couple of perspectives and a good addition to what you have had so far today. My contact details are here, and I'm also available, of course, with Mohammed. If you have any questions, of course, I'm always available. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah? If there are questions right now, I'm also open for any kind of Q&A session. Any questions?
Okay, thank you.
You can close the door.